I joined the police when I was young. I was 20 years old. I had no right telling any man or woman what to do with their life because I knew nothing about life myself. I was 20. But someone somewhere in a government agency decided to recruit me and train me to be a police officer. And I volunteered under advice to go to Tennant Creek in the Northern Territory, which is approximately the middle of absolutely nowhere.
Yep, been there once or twice myself.
It's 1,000 kilometres from Darwin and 550 kilometres from Alice Springs. It's got a population of maybe 3,000 if it's lucky, depending on the season and whether or not there's a football game on. And I was working general duties with a partner whose nickname at the time was Mouse or Little Mouse. And to give reference, we had been working together for a couple of months. She was fantastic. Probably still, in my mind, to this day, one of the best general duties police officer partners I'd ever worked with.
Awesome.
And she was about 60 kilos, if she was lucky, with her gun belt on, and a little bit shorter than I am. And I'm sitting down, but I'm like 5'10", 5'11". I'm not a big guy. We get called to a domestic siege. And so the reason I give that context and the reference is I'm young. I'm only just 21, 22. Like, I'm really young. The frontal lobe doesn't finish until it's 25 for blokes. So, I'm not even a grown-up.
I'm getting schooled.
Yeah.
I'm getting schooled in biology.
Yeah. Life is just dominating me at this time. So we get called to a domestic violence siege. We get there, two well-known people, family of 5, 3 kids, mixed family, so stepfather. The father had been physically abusing the kids or had a history of physically abusing the kids, putting out cigarettes on them, that sort of stuff. The mother had called us. It was not a fantastic relationship. These things exist. Sorry for the listeners at home that, have lived through this. If it brings anything up, maybe just be aware. It's a traumatic siege situation. We arrive and the offender, the guy, he runs off and he jumps the back fence. We try to give chase, but he takes off. We stay with the family to make sure they're safe. We reassure her everything's going to be okay. Now, in a perfect world, take that lady to a woman's shelter, make sure she's protected. But this is Tennant Creek and it's not a perfect world, and there's 2 police officers on duty and that's it. And so while we're in the middle of that, phone rings, 000 call, attempt suicide. So you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You've got a domestic violence situation. You've got an attempt suicide for a young Indigenous male in the main street of Tennant Creek. So we rush to that. We resolve that situation. Please keep in mind, we're dealing with a really violent domestic situation. We go to a attempt suicide, stop the suicide. Ambos turn up. They take away the suicide. Phone rings while we're at the attempt suicide, resolving that. Siege is back on, or domestic violence situations back on. So we get back there as fast as we can. As we arrive, the only other police officer in town, who's a shift sergeant at the time, Rowley, is already there on site. We try to deal with this siege by negotiation. There's a whole range of things that have to be done in anti-police standard operating procedures, legislation, policy for dealing with a siege. And use of a forced entry is a last resort. You're not meant to go into the house. You're meant to coordinate, communicate, resolve as peacefully as you possibly can.
Through phone?
Well, we could talk to the guy.
Okay.
It's a house. It's a 3-bedroom house in Tennant Creek.
But you're outside the house.
We're outside the house. So what we present to is mum and the kids are inside, locked in one of the rooms. It's a long hallway with the living at the front of the house, and then there's 3 bedrooms at the end. There's one light on at the back of the house for one of the rooms, so we make the assumption, right, the kids are in there. Mum comes around the back of the house and she somehow presents and she starts talking to Mouse, my partner. Rolly's already there. He briefs us, old mate's inside and the kids are inside. We don't know what's happening. You can hear the man just yelling and screaming. Okay, this isn't good, we're thinking to ourselves. Rolly and I come up to the house to the door and we try to negotiate and communicate with this guy to get him to open the door and let us in. We come around to the back and we can see through the back window that he's holding 2 knives and he wants to do something with them. He's threatening us to come inside so he can either kill us or we'll kill him. So it's one of those suicide by cop environments.
Yeah.
However, it's a siege situation. He's got the kids, detained. They can't get out. We're not sure what he wants to do, but suicide by cop's a pretty terrifying concept because it means he's at the end of his limits and he could potentially harm himself and others as well. we've got no options. We're, I explained 1,000 kilometres from Darwin. No one's coming in time to resolve the situation and support us. There's no other cops we can call out within a 45-minute time frame, and there's no cops coming from Alice Springs because that's 3.5 to 5 hours away, depending on time and response. Rolly makes the decision as the acting officer in charge or shift sergeant at the time. We're going in. Now, we had only just been presented with the capability to use the X26 taser at the time, and I'm armed with a taser. I'm qualified with a taser. So we get to the door, and it's a solid core wooden door, which means it's heavy and hard, and it's on a deadlock system. We both hinge ourselves up against the vehicle that's parked beside the door, and we both do like double-booted strikes on the door to kick the door in. The door finally busts off its hinges, and like that's no small effort. So we're pretty buggered at this point. There had been some other stuff that had happened before with some pepper spray through the window and, the offender yelling and screaming at us. That hadn't resolved the situation. We get into the door, and we'd already sort of had a bit of a pre-brief on what we're going to do. I present the taser, and Rolly presents the firearm over my shoulder. The requirement for that situation is ECD, or electronic control device, has to have a lethal cover to support because of the reload time on a taser and the distance that can be covered with a lethal threat with a knife or an edged weapon inside of 6.2 metres or whatever the distance is. So I'm presenting the taser. I'm calling on the offender to surrender. And he backs down the hallway towards the 3 bedrooms with the lights on. Rolly's got the firearm over my shoulder. And in my mind, the use of an ECD equates to lethal use of force. So I discharge the ECD, which is pulling the trigger. And, the question, Chip, you asked was, is there a time before this awareness that you have? At that moment, I had formed the intent to pull the trigger on an ECD, which alternatively, if I wasn't equipped with it at the time, would have been a firearm. So I would have shot this guy. And it was at that moment that everything changed in my world about how I think about threats, use of force, dealing with people. The whole concept around reality alters in a split second. The taser top barb strikes the offender. You need 2 barbs to get effective takedown. He gets hit by it, recognises he's not going down, clears it out with a move across the chest. He's got his arms there. He'd previously, the reason I tasered him because he was holding his knife across his wrist, threatening to commit suicide and challenging us to advance on him. So I didn't really want to advance, hence the taser. I didn't want to get stabbed, and I didn't want Roller to shoot him. So tasered. He clears the 1 barb that hits him in the chest. I go to reload the taser because it's the only option I've got. Rolly hasn't started shooting, thankfully. And as I do it, a little bit of comedy, but the taser charges for 5 seconds. And because it's so high pressure, I go to discharge the taser cartridge and taser myself in the hand because it's still going.
Oh, mate.
Yeah. So in the midst of all this craziness, I'm giving myself a boot. Anyway, I realise I'm an absolute dickhead, and I switch it off. I get the next cartridge out, which is a cluster to get out because the holster system was ridiculous. I put it on, and we start advancing down because what happens, and this is the terrifying moment, the way my brain started to change was this gentleman, I shouldn't call him that, offender, goes into the only room that's lit up, the lights on. Our minds are 3 kids, death by cop, suicide by cop. He's gone in there and we don't know what's going to happen. We move pronto up to that door. We're kicking on this door, but it's a hollow core wooden door. So when you put the boot in, the front collapses. It doesn't move. He's bodied himself up against the door. So he's in a room sort of like what we're sitting at the moment, lads, and he's got his body up against the door. So I don't know why I thought of it. Exchange the taser to my other hand, pull out my ASP baton, and it's probably about the only time it's been functional or useful in my policing career, and I punch a hole in the door where I figure he's going to be standing because we've tried to open it. Where, the whole time we're doing all these things, calling on him to surrender, identifying ourselves as police, all these things.
All part of the training.
Yeah, punch a hole in this door with the baton, place the taser through the door, and taser him successfully through the door. He goes down. We're able to effect the arrest. Turns out, Mouse, what a legend of a woman. While we'd been in that conflict with him originally in the hallway before we'd resolved the situation in the room, had managed to negotiate and get the kids out of the house. She'd smashed a window and got the kids out of the house, got them to escape. We didn't know this because we couldn't communicate with her at the time because we're so locked into this conflict with this fella. So we successfully arrest him, no lethal use of force, taser was effective, he's handcuffed, we end up getting up to the hospital with him, and the kids are safe. But that moment, I'm 22, 21 years old, and I realise like this is for real. This is for keeps. People live and die in this job, and your actions will directly affect how that happens.
But how did it change you forever and a day?
It changed me because the training that I received around ECDs, tasers, was the application of force has to be equivalent to lethal force. So in my mind, I'd got to the point where if I didn't pull the trigger, people were going to die. So I needed to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And it was that moment of recognition at that point in time that I was committed to an act that would otherwise have taken another human's life if I wasn't prepared with the right tool at the time.
Yeah.
Now, I know Axon, who make the taser, have done a huge amount of work in developing their less than lethal use of force options.
Yeah.
And now they've got even more fantastic tools out there to provide police officers better options.
Yeah.
Because although it's funny that I tased myself in the hand, it's also shit because it only had one round in that taser before having to manually recharge it.
Yeah.
There are better options out there now. And if those options had been in my hand at the time, I would have resolved that situation rapidly and with the taser without any more of that happening, with the risk of the kids in the room or having to, force entry on another siege situation in another room.
Yeah.
So what changed for me is the lethal application of force and the conscious decision to potentially take someone's life.
Yeah.